You don't belong here." I froze as the HOA Karen in her pink bathrobe screamed in my face right outside my own house, calling the cops because I moved in one day early. Seriously? But when I looked at her driveway, my heart nearly stopped beating. No way. She'd been breaking the law for years without knowing it. And I just found the evidence that could destroy her completely. The woman who thought she controlled this neighborhood had handed me the keys to her downfall. Comment and predict what happens when I confront Karen about this secret. Look, I've seen some weird stuff in my life. Divorced people fighting over who gets the good coffee maker. Sure, contractors arguing about whose fault the crooked tile is. Daily occurrence. But a grown woman in cat slippers declaring war on me before I even got my keys out. That was a new one. I'm standing there thinking, did I accidentally buy her house? Did I run over her dog and forget? Nope. Turns out my crime was existing in my own driveway. Go figure. This is Austin, by the way. Master plumber, recent divorce survivor, and apparently public enemy number one, according to the Pink Bathrobe Patrol. The morning air carried the sound of her fury, a high-pitched keening that made dogs bark 3 houses away. Her bathrobe belt had come untied, flapping behind her like a surrender flag she refused to wave. The pink terry cloth caught the morning breeze like a deranged superhero cape, and her phone's bedazzled case threw tiny rainbows across her fury-twisted face. I could smell coffee from other kitchens mixing with her shrill accusations, creating this surreal breakfast theater where I was apparently the villain in someone else's nightmare. The sound of those fuzzy slippers slapping against wet pavement echoed between houses like gunshots announcing the start of suburban warfare. Here's where it gets interesting. This woman, Abigail Gonzalez, and trust me, I'll never forget that name, wasn't just having a bad morning. She had props, a clipboard materialized from somewhere in those fuzzy pockets along with a measuring tape and what appeared to be a professional camera with a telephoto lens. This wasn't random crazy neighbor behavior. This was premeditated crazy neighbor behavior, which is so much worse. She'd been planning this confrontation, probably watching my house for days, waiting for the perfect moment to establish whatever twisted authority she thought she had over my property. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem this time?" "That's Officer Reyes." And I could already tell from his tone that this wasn't his first rodeo with the bathrobe sheriff. The emphasis he put on this time told me everything I needed to know about Abigail's relationship with local law enforcement. She whirled around like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment, clutching that clipboard like it contained the Constitution itself. "This man is conducting unauthorized early occupancy and commercial trespassing," she announced, pointing at me like I was holding a smoking gun instead of my own house keys. I handed Officer Reyes my ownership papers, deed, title, the whole stack of documents that proved I had every legal right to be standing in my own driveway. He looked at the paperwork, looked at Abigail in her bathrobe and curlers, and I watched 20 years of police experience play across his face. "Ma'am, this gentleman owns this property. He has every right to be here. You'd think that would end it, right?" "Wrong." Abigail puffed up like an angry bird and launched into this speech about neighborhood standards and maintaining property values and ensuring the right type of people lived here. The right type of people. I'm a plumber who saved for 3 years to buy this house. Apparently, that made me some kind of neighborhood terrorist. That's when the real crazy came out. Abigail started taking pictures of me. Not sneaky surveillance shots, but full-blown paparazzi action with that professional camera. The sound of the shutter mixed with morning bird songs, creating this bizarre soundtrack to what was rapidly becoming the weirdest Tuesday of my life. For documentation purposes, she announced like she was conducting some kind of official investigation. She photographed my truck from 6 different angles, my work tools, even my coffee cup. I felt like a crime scene being processed by someone who'd learned police procedure from watching too much TV. Tom Collins, my neighbor from across the street, approached with a friendly smile and a welcome to the neighborhood coffee, but I could see him sizing up the situation like a guy who'd witnessed this particular brand of crazy before. Software developer, work from home, see everything that happens on this street, he said quietly, handing me his business card. Trust me when I say you're going to want to document every interaction with that woman. His voice had that tone people use when they're trying to warn you about something without stating it outright, like when your friend tells you their ex is complicated. Here's what really got my attention, though. Those survey stakes I noticed near the property line. Small orange flags marking boundaries, fresh dirt around the posts like they had been installed recently. Every time I glanced at them, Abigail got more agitated, quickly changing the subject back to my violations of early occupancy protocols. Protocols that apparently existed only in her head, but she defended them like they were carved in stone tablets. There was something about those stakes that made her nervous, like they represented some secret she desperately didn't want me to discover. As Officer Reyes finally convinced Abigail to retreat to her own property, I got my first real look at her setup. The house was nice enough, probably built in the 1970s, well-maintained, but trying too hard. Every edge of her garden was perfectly manicured. Every flower in military formation, like she was trying to prove something to the world about her standards. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the blinds in her front window moving as she continued her surveillance operation. This woman had turned neighborhood watch into a full-time occupation, and I was apparently her primary target. The whole interaction left me feeling like I'd stumbled into someone else's war without knowing the rules. Abigail's hatred felt personal in a way that went beyond simple property disputes. She looked at me like I'd personally wronged her, like my very existence was an insult to everything she held sacred. I kept thinking there had to be more to this story. Normal people don't declare war on strangers over parking violations. But standing there in my own driveway, holding my own house keys, I realized that normal had left this neighborhood a long time ago. That night, I found Abigail with industrial measuring tape stretched across my property, wearing a winter coat over her bathrobe, still in those cat slippers, photographing my house with professional equipment. But she wasn't just measuring. She was marking specific spots with orange spray paint, creating some kind of map or battle plan right there on my lawn. Tom texted me from across the street. She's been out there 2 hours, and she just made a phone call that ended with, tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp. I stared at those orange marks glowing under the streetlight, wondering what exactly Abigail was planning for 6 a.m., what exactly is Abigail planning for tomorrow morning, and why does she need those orange marks? Okay, so remember how I thought the bathrobe lady might just be having a bad day? Yeah, that was cute. Naive Austin-thinking people are basically reasonable. This woman documented my morning coffee routine like I was a terrorist planning something. 47 photos of my truck parked in my own driveway, and not artistic shots either. We're talking police surveillance level stuff here. I'm looking through these pictures thinking, lady, if you put this much effort into literally anything else, you could probably cure cancer. But no, instead of using her obsessive tendencies for good, Abigail had decided to turn me into her personal research project. The citation bombing started at dawn like some kind of bureaucratic Christmas morning from hell. I walked out to find my entire property decorated with violation notices taped to my truck, my door, my mailbox, even my damn trash can. Each one was printed on official-looking letterhead that said Maplewood Neighborhood Standards Authority in bold letters that scream legitimacy. Sounds impressive, right? Except there's no such thing. I called the city planning office just to be sure, and they'd never heard of any Neighborhood Standards Authority. Abigail had created her own little shadow government complete with violation codes, fine structures, and enforcement procedures that would make the IRS jealous. Commercial vehicle in residential area, $200. Early occupancy without proper notification, $200. Disturbing neighborhood peace through intimidating presence, $300. I felt like I was getting tickets for the crime of existing in my own driveway. The surveillance setup was something straight out of a Cold War spy thriller. There's Abigail at exactly 7 a.m. sitting in her beat-up sedan with military-grade binoculars, a legal pad thick enough to write a novel, and a thermos that suggested this was going to be a marathon operation. She'd positioned herself with perfect sight lines to my driveway, my front door, my kitchen window, and even my garbage can placement. I watched her through my blinds as she documented my morning routine with the dedication of a wildlife researcher, tracking endangered species in their natural habitat. Coffee at 7:15, check the mailbox at 7:20, water the plants at 7:25, back inside by 7:30. The woman was building a comprehensive database of my existence, cataloging every mundane detail like it held the secrets to national security. What really got me was the equipment. This wasn't casual neighbor nosiness. Abigail had invested serious money in her stalking operation. The binoculars looked like they could spot satellites. The camera had a telephoto lens that belonged in a nature documentary, and she was taking notes with the kind of systematic precision that suggested military training or severe mental illness, maybe both. She had charts, graphs, and what appeared to be a color-coded filing system for different types of violations. Red for parking infractions, blue for noise complaints, yellow for what she called suspicious activities, like getting my mail at irregular times. But here's where it gets really weird and really illegal. Tom knocked on my door around noon with a computer printout that made my blood run cold and my hands shake with rage. "Your title is clean," he said, spreading county records across my kitchen table like he was laying out evidence at a crime scene. "No easement anywhere in the official documentation. Your property lines are exactly where you think they are." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "But here's the weird part, and I only know this because I work in IT security. She's been using her law firm's computer system to dig into your background, database searches, credit reports, court records, even your utility payment history." The printout he handed me was like looking at my entire life, reduced to search queries and timestamps. My name appeared dozens of times in the law firm's access logs, each entry showing exactly when Abigail had violated her professional ethics and probably several federal privacy laws. She'd pulled my divorce records, my business licensing information, my insurance claims history, even my medical records from when I'd filed a workers' compensation claim 3 years ago. This woman had invaded every aspect of my privacy with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant and the legal authority of absolutely nobody. The business sabotage started that afternoon with a phone call that felt like getting punched in the gut. "Austin, this is Margaret from the Riverside Renovation Project." My stomach dropped before she even continued. "We've decided to go with someone else for the bathroom work. $75,000, 3 months of planning, materials already ordered, gone in 30 seconds. Nothing personal," she continued in that tone people use when they're about to say something very personal. "But we received some calls about potential legal issues with your licensing and insurance. We simply can't risk that kind of liability." Legal issues that existed only in Abigail's twisted imagination, but were apparently convincing enough to cost me the biggest contract of my year. The systematic destruction of my professional reputation became clear as I spent the next 4 hours on the phone doing damage control. She had filed complaints with the contractor licensing board, claiming I was operating without proper permits. Lies, but ones that required official responses and formal documentation to disprove. She'd contacted my insurance company multiple times, reporting unsafe practices and neighborhood disturbances that could affect my coverage and rates. She'd called the Better Business Bureau with detailed allegations of fraud and misconduct, complete with manufactured evidence and fake witness statements that sounded disturbingly professional. The woman had turned harassment into a full-time job, and she was disturbingly good at it. Each phone call I made to defend myself revealed another layer of Abigail's campaign. She'd contacted 3 of my regular clients with anonymous tips about my allegedly problematic behavior. She had left detailed reviews on contractor websites claiming I damaged property and refused to pay for repairs, complete fabrications that would take weeks to get removed. She'd even called my ex-wife, somehow tracking down her new number, trying to dig up dirt from our divorce proceedings. The scope of her investigation into my life was both impressive and absolutely terrifying. The email from the title company arrived that evening like a legal lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Per your request regarding easement research for property at 123 Maple Drive, we have conducted a comprehensive review of all recorded documents affecting your parcel back to the original subdivision plat in 1972. No easement has ever been granted, recorded, or legally established benefiting neighboring properties for driveway access across Lot 47. The language was dry and official, but the implications hit me like lightning. Additionally, current aerial photography confirms existing driveway usage appears to cross established property boundaries without any recorded legal authorization or prescriptive rights establishment. This changed everything. Abigail's driveway, the one she'd been using every single day for who knows how many years, was completely illegal. She was trespassing on my property every time she backed out of her garage. And she knew it. Those survey stakes I'd noticed, her nervousness when I'd asked about property lines, her desperate campaign to drive me away before I could discover the truth. It all made perfect sense now. The woman screaming about neighborhood standards and property rights was committing the biggest property violation on the entire block. But then my phone buzzed with a text that changed the entire game. She's not the only one with access to records. Check your email. And my hands were literally shaking as I opened my laptop, wondering who else had gotten involved in this neighborhood war that was spiraling completely out of control. The email that loaded made my jaw hit the floor and my heart start racing. It was from Derek, Abigail's son, and the subject line read, "You need to see this. Who else is involved in this neighborhood war? And what did they just send him?" And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about rules or regulations or neighborhood standards. This was personal. She hated me. Not just disliked. We're talking full-blown irrational scary movie-level hatred. Why? Because I had the audacity to what? Buy a house, work for a living, exist while not being her ex-husband? I honestly don't know. But sitting in that community center, watching her present her little slideshow of obsession, I realized I wasn't dealing with a difficult neighbor. I was dealing with someone who'd completely lost their grip on reality. And she had my home address, my work schedule, and apparently a really unhealthy amount of free time. Have you ever had a neighbor go full CSI on your daily routine? Let me know in the comments. What's the weirdest thing a neighbor has ever documented about you? The meeting setup was something out of a corporate boardroom. If corporate boardrooms were run by delusional people with too much time and access to office supplies from 1985, Abigail had somehow convinced the community center to let her use their conference room. And she'd arrived 2 hours early with enough equipment to launch a space shuttle. We're talking projector, laptop, laser pointer, extension cord snaking across the floor like electrical spaghetti, and a 73-slide PowerPoint presentation titled Property Standards Enforcement and Community Threat Assessment. The other residents wandered in looking like they'd been summoned to jury duty for a case they didn't understand. The evidence explosion was honestly impressive in its sheer scope and thoroughness. Poster boards lined the walls like some kind of serial killer's lair covered with photos of me doing absolutely normal homeowner activities. She'd created timeline charts with different colored highlighters showing my pattern of aggressive behavior, which apparently included getting my mail at inconsistent times and parking my truck at slightly different angles. There was a behavioral analysis chart that tracked my daily movements like I was a lab rat in some twisted psychology experiment, complete with pie charts showing the percentage breakdown of my suspicious activities. The presentation itself was where Abigail really let her crazy flag fly at full mast. Slide after slide of evidence that I was somehow a threat to property values, community standards, and apparently the American way of life as we know it. She had charts showing truck angle variations with actual protractor measurements. I'm not making this up. And a frequency graph titled Door Slam Analysis that tracked how hard I closed my front door each morning. The laser pointer, which died halfway through her presentation and was immediately replaced with a kitchen spatula she'd brought as backup, traced patterns of my suspicious behavior while she narrated like she was presenting evidence at a murder trial. What really got me was the level of detail she'd achieved in her documentation. She knew what time I made coffee, what brand of cereal I bought, how many minutes I spent checking my mail, even which days I did laundry based on when I took my hamper to the basement. This woman had turned neighborhood surveillance into a science project, and I was her unwilling test subject. She'd photographed my truck from 17 different angles, measured the distance between my garbage can and the curb down to the inch, and somehow acquired audio recordings of me talking on the phone in my own backyard. The audience participation segment was where things got really uncomfortable for everyone except Abigail. She'd prepared evidence binders, thick 3-ring notebooks filled with 347 color photographs of me existing in my own driveway, getting my mail, watering my plants, taking out the trash, loading tools into my truck. She'd categorized everything with little colored tabs and cross-references like some kind of demented library science project. I watched my neighbors flip through pages of my life documented in obsessive detail. Their faces showing growing concern that they were dealing with someone who'd crossed several lines into genuinely disturbing territory. The technical difficulty started when her laptop overheated from running the presentation for 45 minutes straight. While she frantically tried to restart her computer, I caught Tom's eye and he nodded toward his own laptop bag. This was our moment. The county survey I'd requested had come through that morning, and Tom had helped me prepare a little presentation of my own. I'd like to address the property boundary issues Ms. Gonzalez mentioned in her comprehensive analysis, I said, connecting my laptop to her projector while she was still trying to resurrect her crashed system. The room went dead silent as I pulled up the professional survey map. You could hear people's jaws literally dropping as the property boundaries appeared on the big screen, showing Abigail's driveway cutting across my land like a highway through a national park. The visual was undeniable. Her entire driveway from her garage to the street crossed my property line by a solid 12 feet every single day. Every time she backed out of her garage or pulled into her driveway, she was trespassing on land that belonged to me. The woman who had spent the last hour lecturing everyone about property standards was committing the most obvious property violation in the neighborhood. Abigail's reaction was immediate and spectacular. She started dropping papers everywhere, knocking over her carefully arranged poster boards, spilling coffee on her precious evidence while stammering about prescriptive rights, established usage patterns, and historical precedent. But the damage was done. Every person in that room could see the survey lines, could see her driveway cutting across my property, could see that her entire campaign against me was built on the foundation of her own massive illegal behavior. The irony was so thick you could cut it with one of my contractor's saws. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. The security system installation was scheduled for the next morning. Tom knew a guy who specialized in residential surveillance. And after Derek's email showing Abigail's practice sessions, I wanted every interaction documented, but I also wanted to send a message. If Abigail wanted to play property rights games, I was going to show her what actual property rights looked like. The survey was clear my ownership was legal, and her daily trespassing was about to become a very expensive problem for her to solve. The meeting ended with Abigail frantically packing up her equipment while residents whispered among themselves about what they just witnessed. Several people approached me afterward to apologize for not speaking up sooner about her behavior. Apparently, I wasn't her first target. She'd run off 2 other residents with similar harassment campaigns, but they'd moved away rather than fight her. I was the first person who'd bothered to research the actual property laws and challenge her on legal grounds rather than just trying to appease her demands. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the look on Abigail's face when she realized her secret was out. Pure panic mixed with rage, like a cornered animal realizing the trap was closing. Derek's email had warned me that his mother was planning something for after the meeting, something she'd been preparing for weeks. The security cameras were being installed in the morning. But what if she decided to strike tonight? What if desperation made her do something even more reckless than usual? At 2:30 a.m., my worst fears were confirmed. The motion sensors I had installed as a temporary measure lit up my driveway like a football stadium while the alarm shrieked loud enough to wake 3 counties. Through my bedroom window, I watched Abigail freeze like a deer in headlights, dressed head to toe in black, like some kind of middle-aged cat burglar, holding a car key she'd been using to scratch deep gouges in my truck's paint. But as I grabbed my phone to call the police, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Security alarm shrieking at 2:30 a.m. Blue police lights are flooding Austin's driveway. Through the window, Abigail frozen mid-scratch on the truck door, car key in hand, dressed head to toe in black like a cartoon burglar. Officer Reyes stepping out of the patrol car. "Ma'am, drop the key." But as Austin watches through his bedroom window, he notices something that makes his blood run cold. There's a second person hiding in the shadows near his house. Who else is involved in Abigail's plan? So, there I am at 2:30 a.m. watching Abigail get arrested in her burglar costume. And I've got to tell you, it felt good. Really good. Like, probably too good, if I'm being honest. Was I supposed to feel bad for her? Maybe. Did I? Hell no. You know what I felt bad for? The 3 months of sleep I lost worrying about what she'd do next. The clients who dropped me because they thought I was some kind of criminal. My dreams of actually enjoying my first house. Justice might be blind, but revenge has 20/20 vision and a very good memory. And watching Abigail get handcuffed in her discount ninja outfit was like Christmas morning and my birthday rolled into one satisfying package. The arrest scene was like something out of a dark comedy. If dark comedies featured middle-aged women in full cat burglar outfits getting busted for keying pickup trucks at ungodly hours. Officer Reyes stepped out of his patrol car with this expression that said he'd seen everything in 20 years of police work, but this was definitely going in his strangest calls of the decade file. Abigail tried to maintain some dignity while handcuffed in her all-black ensemble. But it's pretty hard to look authoritative when you're wearing a ski mask in August and your burglar gloves have little grip dots on the palms like you bought them from the gardening section at Walmart. The excuse she came up with was pure comedy gold wrapped in delusion. "I was conducting a late-night neighborhood safety inspection of his commercial vehicle," she announced with the conviction of someone who genuinely believed her own lies. "As the appointed community standards coordinator, vehicle compliance monitoring falls under my official duties." Appointed by whom? When? The Constitution of Crazy Town. Officer Reyes just shook his head and started photographing the evidence. My scratched truck, her car key, and what appeared to be a small crowbar she'd brought for what she called thorough inspection purposes. And the woman had come prepared for a full-scale break-in and tried to pass it off as community service. But here's where things got really interesting, and where Abigail's paralegal training actually worked in her favor for once. While sitting in the county jail wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her personality, she managed to research and file the most perfectly crafted legal document I'd ever seen. An emergency ex parte temporary restraining order complete with supporting affidavit, photographic evidence, and a timeline of events that would make a novelist weep with envy. She'd taken her arrest for vandalism and somehow flipped it into a narrative where she was the victim of my systematic campaign of intimidation and harassment. The legal sleight of hand was honestly impressive. According to Abigail's version of events, I had systematically escalated aggressive behavior designed to intimidate and terrorize a vulnerable single woman. My crime, parking my truck on my own property in a way that made her feel unsafe and threatened. She'd included carefully cropped photographs that made my work vehicles look menacing, edited audio recordings that made normal construction sound seem ominous, and witness statements from people I had never met claiming I'd made threatening gestures and used aggressive body language. The woman was a master manipulator. I'll give her that. The temporary victory she scored hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Judge Patterson, working off Abigail's carefully sanitized version of reality and her impressive legal documentation, granted the emergency restraining order at an ex parte hearing where I wasn't even present to defend myself. Suddenly, I was the one with legal restrictions. I had to move my truck away from the property line, couldn't park my work equipment anywhere near my own driveway, and basically had to tiptoe around my own home while she got to act like the innocent victim of my imaginary reign of terror. Watching her celebrate was like swallowing broken glass mixed with battery acid. There she was doing an actual victory dance in her driveway, the same driveway that illegally crossed my property, while I had to move my vehicles like some kind of defeated tenant rather than the property owner. She waved at me through her window with this smug smile that said she'd figured out how to weaponize the legal system against someone who actually followed the rules. For the first time since this whole mess started, I genuinely wondered if I was in over my head. The business damage was swift, brutal, and exactly what she'd been planning all along. Within 48 hours of the restraining order filing becoming public record, my phone started ringing with cancellations. Construction clients don't want contractors with legal troubles, even if those troubles involve neighbors with personality disorders and property disputes that make no sense. I lost the Henderson kitchen renovation, $28,000. The Morrison bathroom addition, $32,000. The commercial plumbing job at the new office complex, $15,000. $75,000 in scheduled work vanished because of one woman's perfectly executed character assassination. That's when Derek made the choice that would change everything. 3 days after his mother's legal victory, I found a USB drive slipped under my door at 3 a.m. with a note written in shaky handwriting that just said, "I'm sorry about what she's doing. This might help. Don't let her know it came from me." The recording on that drive was 23 minutes of Abigail in her kitchen practicing her victim story like she was rehearsing for the performance of her life, complete with fake tears, multiple versions of how she'd been terrorized by her aggressive neighbor, and detailed discussions of her legal strategy with someone on speakerphone. But the real bombshell wasn't her acting practice. It was her confession, clear as day, in her own voice, admitting that the entire harassment campaign had been planned from the moment she saw me moving in. "I researched him before he even signed the papers," she said to whoever was on the other end of that phone call. "Divorced contractor with money to burn. Thinks he can just move into this neighborhood without understanding how things work here. Well, I'll teach him his place. Nobody buys property on my street without my approval." The mask had completely slipped, revealing the calculated predator underneath. The IRS investigation Derek mentioned in his note explained everything about his willingness to betray his own mother. $18,000 in back taxes on unreported income from his cash-only car detailing business with criminal charges pending if he didn't cooperate with federal investigators looking into tax evasion schemes in our area. Derek hadn't recorded his mother out of moral outrage or family loyalty. He'd done it because the immunity deal he'd been offered required him to provide evidence of other criminal activities, and Abigail's systematic harassment campaign qualified perfectly. Sometimes justice arrives for the wrong reasons, but it still counts as justice. The weight of that USB drive in my hands felt like holding dynamite. This wasn't just evidence of harassment. This was proof of perjury, conspiracy, and systematic fraud. Abigail had lied under oath, manufactured evidence, and probably committed several federal crimes in her campaign to destroy me. But using it meant destroying Derek's relationship with his mother forever, turning a family conflict into a legal nuclear war that would leave casualties on all sides. I stared at that USB drive for hours, knowing it could save my business and my sanity, but also knowing it would make me complicit in tearing apart what was left of their family. Derek stands outside Austin's house at midnight holding a USB drive with Abigail's recorded confession. Through the window, Austin packing boxes, giving up on the dream edition. Derek raises a hand to knock, lowers it, raises it again. The evidence that could save Austin but destroy his mother weighs heavily in his palm. But then Derek notices Austin's laptop is still open on the kitchen table. And on the screen is an email that changes everything. What did Austin just discover that Derek doesn't know about? Here's the thing nobody tells you about watching someone destroy their own family. It's horrible and satisfying at exactly the same time. Derek sitting there testifying against his own mother. That's the kind of thing that should make you feel sick. And it did. But it also made me feel vindicated in a way that probably says terrible things about me as a human being. I kept thinking, this is what happens when you push people too far. Then I'd think, Jesus, Austin, the kid's destroying his relationship with his mother for you. It's complicated. You know, life's messier than the movies make it seem. But watching that USB drive play Abigail's confession to a packed courtroom, that felt like the universe finally balancing its books. The courtroom was standing room only, not because my case was particularly important in the grand scheme of legal history, but because word had spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a church potluck. I recognized faces from the community meeting, people from surrounding streets who'd apparently heard about Abigail's surveillance operation through the suburban telegraph system, and even some folks I'd never seen before, who just seemed drawn to the spectacle of watching someone's carefully constructed lies fall apart in public. There's something about community justice that draws people like moths to a flame, especially when the person getting their comeuppance has been making everyone's life difficult for years. Derek's hand shook like a leaf in a hurricane as he placed the USB drive in the court's evidence player. The kid looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, his eyes hollow and his face pale with the weight of what he was about to do to his own family. For a split second, watching him struggle with the decision, I felt genuinely sorry for him. Destroying your mother's life has to tear your soul apart, even when she deserves it. Then I remembered my cancelled contracts, my halted dreams, my reputation lying in ruins, and the sympathy lasted exactly as long as it took him to press that play button and let his mother's voice fill the courtroom with her own damning words. The sound of Abigail's confession was like listening to someone dig their own grave with their tongue. I researched him before he even unpacked his first box. Her voice came through the speakers with crystal clarity. Divorced contractor with insurance money burning a hole in his pocket. Thinks he can just waltz into this neighborhood without understanding how things really work here. Well, I'll teach that upstart bastard his place. Nobody buys property on my street without going through me first. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible, like the sound of 20 people simultaneously realizing they'd been living next to a sociopath. Judge Thompson's face went through more expressions than a silent movie actor during those 23 minutes of audio evidence. Disbelief when Abigail described her research phase using her law firm's computers. Anger when she detailed her systematic campaign to destroy my business relationships. Disgust when she laughed about making me dance like a puppet with her fake violation notices. And finally, that cold professional mask that judges wear when they're about to drop the legal equivalent of a nuclear bomb on someone who richly deserves it. "Mrs. Gonzalez," he said when the recording ended. "Do you have any comment on what this court has just heard?" Abigail's defense was like watching someone try to put out a gasoline fire with more gasoline. She claimed the recording was taken completely out of context and that she'd been practicing dialogue for a community theater production about neighborhood disputes. Community theater? Really? That was the best she could come up with. She insisted that her research had been standard due diligence and that her violation notices were legitimate attempts to maintain community standards, but every excuse just dug her deeper into the hole she'd created for herself. Especially when Derek produced the access logs from her law firm's computer system. The database access evidence was like watching a master class in how to destroy your own career. Derek had somehow obtained printouts showing every illegal search Abigail had conducted, time-stamped and logged, like digital fingerprints leading straight back to her workstation. She'd accessed my divorce records, my business licensing information, my credit reports, my insurance claims history, and even my medical records from a workers' compensation claim I'd filed 3 years earlier. Every search was a violation of federal privacy laws, professional ethics rules, and probably several state statutes I didn't even know existed. The woman had turned identity theft into a hobby. Derek's testimony about the IRS investigation was the final nail in Abigail's legal coffin, and it explained everything about his willingness to destroy his own mother's life. $18,000 in unreported income from his cash car detailing business with federal criminal charges hanging over his head like a sword of Damocles. The immunity deal he'd been offered required him to provide evidence of other criminal activities within his family, and Abigail's harassment campaign checked every box the federal prosecutors needed. "I chose avoiding prison over protecting my mother's lies," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "She asked me to be her accomplice and I chose my future instead." The judge's ruling was swift, decisive, and absolutely devastating for Abigail's carefully constructed victim narrative. On this record, recorded admissions, illegal database access, systematic perjury, and fabricated evidence. The court finds clear and convincing proof of abuse of process. Judge Thompson announced the respondent's restraining order is hereby vacated immediately, and Mr. Gray is restored to full use of his property, but he wasn't done. Furthermore, this court is issuing a no-contact order protecting Mr. Gray from any further harassment by Mrs. Gonzalez and referring this matter to the state attorney's office for criminal prosecution. The professional consequences hit Abigail like a tsunami of karma before she even made it out of the courthouse. Her law firm fired her via text message while she was still sitting at the defendant's table. Illegal database access and perjury charges don't look good on a paralegal's resume. The State Bar Association opened an ethics investigation that would permanently bar her from any legal work in the future. Her professional reputation built over 15 years of competent work evaporated in the span of 23 minutes of her own recorded admissions. The woman who'd used the legal system to attack me had been expelled from that same system for her abuse of it. The civil lawsuit I filed the next day was like adding insult to injury, except the injury was entirely self-inflicted. Defamation, business interference, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and about 6 other causes of action my lawyer had dreamed up while listening to Abigail's confession. The settlement demand was simple. $15,000 for my lost business, plus legal fees, plus a written apology to every client she'd contacted with her lies. She had 30 days to pay or face a jury trial where her confession would be played for 12 strangers who would probably award me everything she owned plus punitive damages. Derek's final act of family destruction was requesting a restraining order against his own mother. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "My mother has exhibited a pattern of delusional and criminal behavior that has escalated to the point where I fear for my own safety and mental health. She's threatened to destroy my life if I testified against her, and I believe she's capable of following through on that threat." The judge granted the order without hesitation, officially severing the last legal connection between mother and son. But even with victory in sight, there was still one more twist coming that would change everything. As I read through the email from the county surveyor that had arrived during the court recess, confirming what I already knew about the easement situation, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The timestamp showed the email had been sent 3 days before the hearing, but there was a second email marked confidential that I'd been afraid to open until now. Email from county surveyor arrives during court break. Survey confirmed. No easement rights established. Recommend immediate declaratory judgment filing. Building permit pre-approved pending court order. Austin realizes he's 24 hours away from legal authority to block Abigail's driveway permanently. But as he reads the email, he notices the timestamp. It was sent 3 days ago. If the county knew there was no easement 3 days ago, why didn't they tell Abigail? And why is there a second email marked confidential that he's afraid to open? The fence went up on a Tuesday. Beautiful day, actually. Birds singing, sunshine, and me getting the most expensive revenge in human history. Installed by professionals with building permits and everything. You want to know the truth? It felt incredible. Every post that went into the ground felt like justice being hammered into the earth. Every board that went up felt like protection I'd earned through months of documented harassment. And yeah, every minute that Abigail couldn't use her precious illegal driveway felt like sweet, sweet payback served at exactly the right temperature. But watching her chain herself to that sprinkler head, seeing her in that white dress, grass-stained and desperate like some kind of suburban protest martyr, for about 30 seconds, I almost called the whole thing off. Almost. Then I remembered 47 false police reports and my sympathy evaporated faster than morning dew in August. Has anyone else ever had a neighbor lose their absolute mind during construction? Tell me about the wildest thing someone did to try and stop your home improvements. The confidential email I'd finally opened the night before had explained everything about why the county had been so helpful with my fence permit application. Turns out Abigail hadn't been their first problem. The county planning department had been dealing with her complaints, demands, and threats for over 2 years. She'd filed 17 separate complaints about various neighbors, demanded property line surveys that she refused to pay for, and had somehow convinced herself that she held some kind of official authority over neighborhood development. The planning director's note was brutally honest. Mrs. Gonzalez has been a persistent source of frivolous complaints and harassment of county staff. Any legitimate action to resolve property boundary disputes in her area has our full support. The declaratory judgment hearing was like the legal equivalent of a victory lap around a track I'd been forced to run blindfolded for months. Judge Thompson reviewed the county survey, the title company's comprehensive research, the planning department's recommendations, and about 15 other official documents that all said exactly the same thing. Abigail had no legal right whatsoever to use my property for her driveway access. Pursuant to the declaratory judgment entered this day, he announced with a kind of official gravity that makes legal victories taste better, petitioner Austin Gray may erect a boundary fence per approved building permit. Respondent Abigail Gonzalez is permanently enjoined from entering petitioner's property absent legitimate emergency circumstances. The building permit approval process had been surprisingly smooth, mainly because I'd done everything exactly by the book and had official county support backing my application. 6-foot cedar privacy fence with decorative gate, proper setbacks from all boundary lines, emergency access provisions for utilities, and materials that exceeded code requirements for wind resistance and longevity. The city inspector, who'd been harassing me for months based on Abigail's false complaints, showed up during the initial installation. Not to stop the work, but to verify that everything was being done to professional standards. Clean install, proper foundation depth, meets all municipal requirements, he said, adding his signature to the inspection certificate. Sometimes irony tastes better than victory. The fence crew I'd hired were absolute professionals who'd dealt with property disputes before, but even they seemed entertained by the level of drama surrounding this particular installation. "Lady's been watching us from her window with binoculars for 3 hours," the foreman mentioned during their lunch break. "Never seen anyone take fence construction so personally." And they worked with efficient precision, turning property boundaries into physical reality, one post at a time, while Abigail conducted her surveillance operation from multiple vantage points around her house. She was documenting everything, taking photos like she was building evidence for some kind of fence-related war crimes tribunal. Abigail's final protest attempt was both pathetic and oddly heroic, like watching someone make a last stand for a cause that existed only in their own mind. She showed up around noon wearing what might have been her wedding dress, a white number that looked expensive, but was now grass-stained and wrinkled from her morning reconnaissance mission. She'd brought chains, padlocks, and a homemade sign that read, "Property rights are human rights," in red marker that was already starting to run in the humidity. Her plan, apparently, was to chain herself to the fence construction and stop the installation through the power of civil disobedience. The chain situation became pure comedy gold when she realized she'd locked herself to my neighbor's sprinkler system instead of anything related to my fence project. In her emotional state and obvious panic, she'd grabbed the wrong piece of metal infrastructure and was now securely attached to an irrigation pipe that belonged to the people on the other side of her house. Officer Reyes arrived within minutes of my call, took one look at the situation, and I could see him fighting not to laugh. "Ma'am, you're going to need to unlock yourself from that sprinkler head so we can discuss this situation properly." The combination lock she'd used to secure herself had apparently been chosen in haste because Abigail couldn't remember the numbers she'd set. So, there we were, a middle-aged woman in a grass-stained wedding dress, chained to outdoor plumbing, frantically trying different number combinations while my fence crew continued working 20 feet away like nothing unusual was happening. "Try her birthday," Tom suggested helpfully from his front porch where he was enjoying the entire spectacle with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be popcorn. Or maybe the date she first called the cops on Austin. Even Officer Reyes had to turn away to compose himself. The fence completion ceremony was a thing of beauty that I'll remember until the day I die. 6 feet of cedar privacy fence with brass hardware, professionally installed, fully permitted, and absolutely completely 100% legal. The gate swung smoothly as silk and locked with a solid click that echoed across the neighborhood like a gavel falling in the court of poetic justice. I stood there holding the key to my own property boundary, looking at the most expensive lawn ornament in subdivision history, and feeling like I just won the lottery and the Super Bowl simultaneously. The immediate practical effect was exactly what I'd hoped for, and what Abigail had apparently never considered as a real possibility. Her car sat trapped in her garage like an expensive paperweight with no legal way to reach the street except by driving across my property, which was now blocked by 6 feet of cedar and a locked gate that I controlled completely. She'd have to park 3 blocks away and walk to her own house carrying groceries and mail and whatever else she needed every single day for the rest of the time she lived there. The woman who had spent months trying to control my use of my own property had lost access to hers through her own illegal behavior. The community reaction was fascinating to observe from my new vantage point behind the fence. Some neighbors genuinely felt bad for Abigail. Watching someone lose their mind in public is never pleasant, even when they deserve it. But most seemed relieved that the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer had finally been neutralized by someone willing to fight back with actual legal weapons instead of just hoping she'd get bored and move on to terrorizing someone else. Property values had actually started recovering already, according to Tom's real estate research, now that the area's biggest liability had been legally defanged. The routine that developed over the following week was like watching karma work its magic in slow motion. Every morning, Abigail would have to drive to the end of her street, park wherever she could find a legal spot, and walk back to her house carrying whatever she needed for the day. Every evening, the process reversed with her trudging back to her car loaded down with work bags, groceries, dry cleaning, and the accumulated weight of her own terrible decisions. And twice a day, she'd walk past my beautiful fence, knowing that every step she took was a reminder of how spectacularly her harassment campaign had backfired. The phone call I overheard through the fence around sunset was what convinced me that Abigail had moved from annoying neighbor to potentially dangerous adversary. She was standing in her backyard talking loud enough that I could hear every word through the cedar boards. And what she was saying made my blood run cold. Phase 1 was the legal stuff, and that didn't work, she said to whoever was on the other end of the call. Time for Phase 2. Fence nearly complete. Gate hardware being installed. Abigail makes a desperate 911 call, claiming Austin threatened to eliminate her permanently if she doesn't move away. Dispatcher's voice. "Ma'am, we're sending units for threats of violence." Austin overhears a call through the fence, realizes Abigail's final gambit is a false police report about death threats, but then he notices something terrifying. Abigail is still on the phone with someone else, and she just said Phase 2 is a go. What the hell is Phase 2? So, what did I learn from all this? Well, first, never underestimate a crazy person with too much time and access to office supplies. Second, always read your property survey like your life depends on it because it might. Third, sometimes the best revenge really is living well, preferably behind a really nice fence with a really good lock. Do I feel bad about what happened to Abigail? That's complicated. I feel bad that someone got so twisted up inside that they thought destroying a stranger was the answer to their problems. I feel bad that Derek had to choose between his conscience and his mother. But do I feel bad that she lost? Do I feel bad that her plan backfired so spectacularly that she ended up losing everything she was trying to protect? Nah, not even a little bit. Sometimes karma needs a little help from building permits and property law. The false police report was Abigail's final desperate gambit, and it was every bit as poorly planned and executed as everything else she tried. Standing 20 feet away from my fence at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. She called 911 claiming I had just threatened to eliminate her permanently if she didn't move away from the neighborhood. The problem with lying to police when you're already on their extensive radar is that they tend to investigate your claims with the thoroughness of people who've been burned by you before. Officer Reyes had been responding to Abigail's calls for over a year and his patience had worn thinner than dollar store toilet paper somewhere around call number 37. The investigation into her latest false report was like watching a master class in how not to lie to law enforcement. Officer Reyes pulled up on his computer the complete history of every interaction between Abigail and me, including Tom's security footage, the restraining order transcripts, and about 47 previous reports that had all turned out to be either fabricated or grossly exaggerated. The pattern was so clear, it might as well have been written in neon letters across the sky. Serial false reporter finally runs out of believable stories and gets increasingly desperate. My security system proved to be the best investment I'd made since buying the house. Tom's cameras and my own surveillance setup had recorded every single interaction Abigail and I had ever had, and absolutely none of them included threats of violence from me toward her. In fact, the footage showed me going out of my way to avoid contact with her, changing my work schedule to minimize our interactions, and generally behaving like someone trying to de-escalate rather than threaten. The audio contradicted every single claim she'd made, creating an airtight case that she'd fabricated the entire incident out of whole cloth. But here's where it gets really interesting. The investigation revealed that this wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment lie born from desperation. Abigail had been planning this false report for weeks, researching exactly what kind of threats would generate the most serious police response. She'd made practice calls to friends, rehearsing her scared victim voice, and timing her emotional breaks for maximum effect. She'd even researched the specific legal language that would turn a simple harassment complaint into a felony-level investigation. The woman had turned false reporting into a scientific process. The computer analysis of her phone records was absolutely damning. In the 3 days leading up to her false report, she'd made 17 calls to various law enforcement agencies asking hypothetical questions about threat reporting procedures. She'd called the domestic violence hotline asking about what kind of language constituted actionable threats. She'd even contacted the FBI field office asking about interstate harassment laws. Every call was logged, time-stamped, and recorded, creating a paper trail that showed clear premeditation and malicious intent. The plea hearing was almost anticlimactic after everything that had led up to it. Faced with video evidence, audio recordings, phone logs, and a pattern of false reports going back 3 years, Abigail's public defender basically threw in the towel before the prosecution even finished their opening statement. The deal was simple and non-negotiable. Plead guilty to filing a false police report, pay $15,000 in fines for wasting public resources, accept 2 years of supervised probation, and undergo a mandatory psychological evaluation. The alternative was a jury trial she couldn't possibly win, and potential jail time she definitely couldn't afford. Derek's final testimony was the hardest part of this entire ordeal to watch, even harder than seeing Abigail in handcuffs. The kid had to stand up in open court and explain to a judge why he needed legal protection from his own mother. "Your Honor, my mother's behavior has escalated beyond anything I can handle or rationalize," he said, his voice breaking with genuine pain. "She's threatened to destroy my life if I don't help her get revenge on Mr. Gray. And given what she's already done to him, I believe she's absolutely capable of following through on those threats." The restraining order was granted immediately, officially severing the last legal connection between them. The civil settlement I received was like the cherry on top of the world's most expensive revenge sundae. $15,000 for defamation and business interference, plus all my legal fees, plus a written letter of apology to every client she'd contacted with her lies. The money wasn't really the point. I would have paid twice that amount just to watch her get arrested in her burglar outfit. But it felt good to have my legal bills covered by the woman who'd made them necessary. More importantly, the settlement created a permanent legal record of exactly what she'd done and why she'd done it. The foreclosure notice that appeared on Abigail's door 3 weeks later was like watching the final domino fall in a chain reaction that she'd started herself. She couldn't afford her mortgage payments, the criminal fines, the civil judgment, and Derek's lost income all at the same time. The house she'd fought so desperately to protect from people like me was being seized by the bank because of her war against people like me. The irony was so perfect, it felt like the universe had hired a professional screenwriter to craft the ending to this suburban nightmare. But the real satisfaction came from the small daily victories that accumulated over the following months. Watching Abigail struggle with grocery bags as she walked 3 blocks to her car every morning. Seeing her waiting at the bus stop in the rain after her car got repossessed. Knowing that every time she looked at my fence, she was reminded of exactly how spectacularly her plans had backfired. The woman who had tried to make my life miserable had succeeded mainly in making her own life unbearable. The final chapter of this whole mess came 6 months later when Derek sent me a Christmas card from Phoenix. He'd used his immunity deal and witness protection relocation assistance to start over in Arizona, where he was managing an auto shop and engaged to a kindergarten teacher named Sarah. "Thank you for showing me that doing the right thing sometimes means choosing strangers over family," he wrote. "Mom needed help I couldn't give her, and you deserve justice I could provide. I hope you're enjoying your peace and quiet." The card had a photo of him and Sarah at the Grand Canyon. Both of them smiling like people who had escaped from prison and found freedom on the other side. That fence isn't just wood and metal, folks. That's 6 feet of actions have consequences built to code and installed with proper permits. It's beautiful. The brass nameplate I had installed reads, "Property boundary, respect, and peace." And every morning when I see it, I'm reminded that some problems really do have permanent solutions. Derek manages 3 auto shops now and sends updates twice a year. He's married to Sarah and they have twins on the way. As for Abigail, last I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, she works part-time at a discount store and rides the bus everywhere. The house she tried so hard to control is now home to the Garcia family, and their kids play soccer in the same driveway Abigail used to guard like it was Fort Knox. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just building really good boundaries and living your best life behind them. If you enjoyed watching systematic harassment backfire completely, hit that like button. Share your neighborhood coordinator story in the comments. We've all met an Abigail at some point. Subscribe for more boundary disputes where the good guys win through proper documentation and legal process. Pro tip: always check your title Schedule B and your city's fence codes before making any property moves. Knowledge is power, people, and good fences make the best neighbors. That's another story from the Silent Brave, where neighborhood drama meets justice. If you enjoyed watching Abigail's harassment campaign backfire completely, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think about this whole mess. And I'll see you in the next story, where we dive into more tales of people who thought they could get away with anything until they met someone who knew exactly how to fight back.